And if you stayed for 2 years, working 10 hours a day, then they would admit you to the school. Washington became Armstrong's star pupil. He returned to Hampton then as a teacher. When the white citizens of Tuskegee, Alabama wrote to Armstrong and said, hey, we want to set up one of these schools. We hear you've got this school, which teaches black people to be more efficient workers, gives them a will to work, and teaches them to avoid thinking about politics. We'd like one of those schools ourselves. Send us a teacher. Armstrong does. And he sends them that guy. And it's like that scene at the beginning of Blazing Saddles when the black sheriff rides into town. Citizens of Tuskegee, Alabama are like, this is not what we had in mind. And they write back to him, they say, sorry, you made a mistake. And Armstrong writes back and says, oh no, this is the guy you want. Trust me, this is the guy you want. And Booker T. Washington builds Tuskegee Institute. Oh, let me show you this too. That idea that you would instill these habits of industry to give people the kind of moral fiber to work hard so they wouldn't just lie around and become extinct. They started to admit Native Americans. Same idea. They profit from this kind of instruction. These are Native Americans. That's the first big building erected at Tuskegee. Washington basically creates of Tuskegee Institute a shortcut and reaches such prominence that, again, when the founders of the Atlantic Cotton States Exposition are looking for a speaker, they turn to Booker T. Washington. He's a classroom. No figure in African American history is more controversial. You will find lots of historians who've written about Booker T. Washington, and there are hints of what I've just said in this, that Washington was an Uncle Tom. The betrayer of his race, who shuffled along and played the role that whites wanted him, the docile, accommodating guy. The other way, or another way, is to regard Washington as a pragmatist. Let's face it. You're simply not going to be able to do or make the kinds of arguments that Frederick Douglass was making. Not in this moment. So what Washington is at least able to do is by pursuing this kind of accommodating of white supremacy approach, he's at least able to get white people to allow a school to exist. In fact, to give him money to run it, to have him educate black people, creating teachers who would go out across the South. But this is pragmatism. And then people like me, looking back, have the luxury of being dismissive of him, but in the circumstances, what he accomplished was extraordinary. Yet a third one that's very popular, interpretation very popular among historians now, is Washington was a trickster. That he was playing white. That he basically would do the little shuffle and he would say, you know, oh, you know, yes, I know all of us black people, we just want to lay around and not work. That's why I have to have this school. And white people would open their coffers and create an international showplace of his school. Really interesting to work this argument with your students and see what they come up with.
The last argument, because you know I kind of played with that last argument quite a bit. But when I look back at the slaves in slavery, you could kind of make the analysis.
Exactly.
The parallel, because the slave kind of played dumb to a certain degree.
Absolutely right.
To survive.
Absolutely.
And I kind of look at Booker T playing dumb.
Exactly.
You know,
can play that exact same role. That just like enslaved people using these skills of manipulation and trickery to survive, Rear Rabbit, surviving in the briar patch. You could read Washington that way.
And he was a former slave.
Now, here's a picture of carpentry at Tuskegee. This is the Tuskegee, this is the Booker T. Washington Memorial at Tuskegee. Lifting the veil of ignorance from his enslaved race. Have we seen that before?
Yes.
The crouching, kneeling black person. But now Washington cast in the role of Lincoln. In terms of my own interpretation of this, I try to avoid getting too deep in the question of motive. Was he sincere? Was he a manipulator? I don't think we can really know. So when I teach this to my students, part of what I try to do is I try to just think contextually. How is it that he's so successful? And I think part of the answer, again, is the argument that I've been trying to thread through this whole lecture. He's so successful in part because of the moment. This is a moment in which white Northerners and white Southerners have reached a kind of reconciliation to agree to forget about black equality. And having a black person who essentially gives a seal of approval to that deal is pretty reassuring to both. At the same time, he spoke so much to the culture of the moment. If a man is worth $1, he'll be treated as $1. The Gilded Age, this materialistic temper that Washington captured perfectly. Doesn't matter what you know, it's what you can do. Is it practical? Work, practicality, materialism. Not some highfalutin Greek. He tells a great story. He tells a story about the saddest thing he ever saw was this black child in a pair of greasy overalls, sitting in a weed-filled yard in front of a dilapidated house, reading a French grammar. How stupid is that?
Okay.
That guy should learn how to do laundry. Should learn how to mow the lawn, paint the house. W.E.B. DuBois, one of Washington's critics, says, one wonders what Plato would have said. Because he captures that materialistic temper, they love him. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, they become leading patrons of Booker T. Washington. Here's Washington and Carnegie with the faculty at Tuskegee. Here's President Theodore Roosevelt with Washington. So thoroughly did he capture this. The irony, of course, is that this whole ideology of self-help, black people have to lift themselves, is being funded by a lot of really rich white. So powerful was Washington. So risky was it for any black person to cross it that there was virtually no black dissent. But eventually, in the early 20th century, some black critics begin to emerge. And that, of course, is the most successful. W.E.B. DuBois, who would be a founder of the Niagara Movement in 1905, in 1910, one of the founders of the NAACP, the National Association. It would be Du Bois who would say of Booker T. Washington, that I think we asked you to read this essay of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others, who would ask the question, how does a race choose its leader? Who chose Booker T. Washington? Can a race of people rise to a position of dignity when they voluntarily submit to degradation? Can people rise economically if they are excluded from political power from the defense of the battle? These would be the questions that Du Bois would grapple through the course of a long career, in his case, would continue to the 1960s. Thanks a million. Not necessary. Get a quick break.
All right, just so you know, there's a brown, this is your evaluation, so as you go through this morning, it'll make it a little easier, I think, and each time, just got that response for us. And of course, if you have any of the forms that you need to fill out, make sure I get those before you leave today, okay? And do y'all need a break, or can we go ahead and let Mr. Earl
You have your
come and speak, and then maybe take a break after that? Y'all need a little break? Okay, go 5 minutes, and then we'll be back here. Make it 5 minutes, we're running just a little behind, okay?
Should I leave the projector?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass mine.
Perfect.